Welcome everyone. I'm GPS Professor Moonsop Lee, and I'll be kicking off tonight's event. Hosted by the Peter F. Koeh Center on Global Policy at the Global Transformation and the Korea Pacific Program at GPS. This event is part of the Pacific Leadership Fellows Program, so we thank all of you for your continued generosity and engagement. Our founding supporters, the Joan and Erwin Jacobs, our dedicated staff and colleagues, and our community of friends, scholars, collaborators, and PLFs. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. The talk is being recorded and will be later featured on our website. I will be moderating a Q&A discussion following the presentation, so please hold your questions until then. But lastly, there will be a short reception at the end of the event to enjoy refreshments and mingle. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's guest of honor. The Pacific Leadership Fellow, Jong-Wha Lee, is currently Dean of the College of Political Science and Economics and Dean of the Graduate School of Policy Studies at Korea University in South Korea. He was the president of the Korea Economic Association in 2022 and previously served as the president for the Korea International Economic Association. He served as a senior advisor for international economic affairs to former President Lee Myung-bak of South Korea. He was also previously chief economist and director general of economics and research department at the Asian Development Bank. And he was also an economist at the International Monetary Fund. So Lee has written and published extensively on topics relating to human capital, growth, financial crisis, and economic integration in leading academic journals. His most recent books include Is This the Asian Century in 2017, which is the title of today's presentation, and Education Matters, Global Schooling Gains from the 18th Century to the 21st Century with Robert J. Barrow in 2015. So he was awarded Cheongnan Prize, Maegyeong Economist Award, Dasan Economics Award, and Incheon Award. All right, so without a further ado, please join me in welcoming PLF Lee.
Thank you, Moonsop, for kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor to give a talk here today at GPS. Today, what I'm going to talk about is the future of Asia. So whether the Asian century will really come. So some believe that Asia's rapid economic growth and the deepening interconnectiveness over the past half century represent the beginning of the Asian century, implying that this is the time when the region will supplant the U.S. in the world as the world dominant force in the 21st century. We'll see. So now 1/5 of the way into the Asian century, so we can ask the question whether this prediction is correct or not. Okay. So for this presentation, I'll mainly discuss the 4 issues, including first, the rising power and the role of Asia in the global economy, and then the contributing factors that made Asia's strong economic growth, and then the challenges to the Asia's sustained growth, and lastly, but not least, the future of Asia. So over the past half century, as we know, the world has witnessed the rise of the Asia's economic power, and it has been the dominant trend. So with the prominent growth of China and India and other Asian countries, Asia has emerged as the largest and the most dynamic region in the world. This has shifted the geopolitical landscape of Asia and the world. So as you can see from this chart, China is already the largest economy. If you measure the GDP, economic power as a GDP in terms of the purchasing power parity adjusted international dollar, it means the living cost in China is much cheaper than in the US. I mean, you can use the market exchange rate, but the market exchange rate is fluctuating a lot. But even the IMF predicts that China's economic power measured by GDP in market exchange rate will supplant that of the US in 2028. So we eventually will see the China's economic size will be bigger than the United States. And then the share of the Indian economy, as you can see from here, the blue color has been rising also very rapidly. So some people say this is not the first Asian century. According to the economic historians, such as the Angus Madison, Asia accounted for more than half of the world economics output until 1820. So the two largest economies in the world was always the China and India. So the rising economic power of Asia in the world economy is not a revolution. It's not a revolution. It's a restoration. The economic historians said. So, of course, we understand that there were industrial revolution, there's massive concentration of the capital, and technological revolution, and the West, especially the Europe, became the center of economic power in the 19th centuries. And then it took many things, but including the two world wars for the US to supplant Europe in the 20th centuries. So we don't know what will happen from now on. So the question is, though, why the Asia as a whole has become a dominant economic power in the world before and once again? Well, obviously, the GDP is gross domestic product. It has two components. One is the population and per capita GDP. And then Asia, always this is the country has more than half of population. So naturally, Asia would be a dominant power in the world. But it has been very poor countries since the Industrial Revolution relative to the Western countries. So this population size is remained very highest portion of the world population. So Asia's dominance will come, and the number of population will decline in some countries, but still is very big. But the rise of the Asia is not just due to the population size, because what we have seen in the 20th centuries is the more important thing was the rise of the per capita GDP. It's a rapidly increased. This is a log scale, so it's proportion. So you can see these countries are really reducing the gap in terms of the per capita GDP relative to the United States. So it has been rising in the beginning by starting from the Japan, and then the Asian tigers, is called four tigers, including South Korea, followed by China and India. So whether the Asia as a whole emerge as a dominant economic power from the global perspective, and the Asian century really comes in the coming decades, will depend on the prospect of the per capita GDP, means the economic growth matters a lot because population size is always dominant. So that's why everyone is interested in what will happen to China, what will happen to India in terms of the economic growth. China can maintain the strong growth or not. So, but you understand that Asia's global influence has risen a lot. It's now is global power. The rise is changing the world economy and the international governance structure. So you cannot deny that. So it's in many aspects. So Asia becomes a new engine of the global production, trade, and investment. It transformed the global commodity markets, and trade has become very important. And then sometimes it gives a lot of downward pressure on jobs and wages in the industrial countries, including United States. And Asia's middle class, Asia becomes richer and richer. So it's the middle class has been increasing, and consumption power becomes very much important. So Asian countries not just the export power, but also consumption power. And Asia's power in global institutions and governance system has been rising. I was representing G20 from the South Korea between 2010 until 2012. At the time, the G20 structure was basically including the power of the emerging countries in the global scenes and global governance. So there was a lot of discussions how to restructure this global governance. I'll get to these global governance issues later. One important issue is the technology. Yes, I would say that Asia is also emerging as new global technology innovator. This is sometimes getting into the conflict with the United States. But we understand that many Asian countries, internet users have risen very rapidly. More than half of the internet users are in Asia, and they are well connected through internet. And then in terms of the venture capital, now you can see that this is from the McKinsey. The Asia has the huge venture capital, and this data shows that between 2013 and 2018, China is just the similar size of the venture capital as the United States. And now we see that this kind of venture capitals and venture startups in the South Korea and China and Southeastern Asian countries, of course, also including the India. Now a lot of venture capitals appear in the fields such as autonomous vehicles, 3D printings, and robotics, drones, and artificial intelligence. So we'll see in the future whether these countries will become the innovators. I'll get to this issue later a little bit. So the question is now, okay, we see the data, okay, Asia, you cannot deny Asia is the global power in terms of the economic power. Geopolitical issues are more complicated. I'm not expert of that, but I'll try to explain that. Okay, so now let's see what is the contributing factors to the Asia's rising economic power, because that will give us some implications for the future of Asia in the coming decades. So some people say that, okay, there was very special things in Asia, like culture and geography, and people emphasize the Confucianism. I'm not in that school, so because I'm more trained economist, so maybe Confucianism was there for centuries, and then people say, okay, because of Confucianism, Asian countries is underdeveloped. So Confucianism or geography might be important, but it may not be a critical factor for Asia's economic success. Some people look at the Asian market. Okay, this is a huge debate. Okay, Asian countries has some kind of unique and superior economic policies and institutions. I think I'm more likely emphasize export-led growth strategy. These countries, especially like poor tigers, lack the resources, and they need to rely on the export to earn more foreign resources. They need to buy the energies, so raw materials for the export. So these kind of things was very important. But sometimes the role of a state is exaggerated. Some Chinese scholars and others may say, okay, Chinese state capitalism is a Beijing consensus, and we should follow the Chinese model. But we should remember, I mean, the China and India triggered their miracles or whatever take off by removing state intervention. So it's actually they followed more likely capitalism to take off their economies. And then the role of government is not really entire control by the state, more skillful bureaucratic implementations of the right policies and then some pragmatic approaches. But this is a complicated issue, how to assess the economic policies in East Asian countries. But one thing I should also mention is there is no one model. Asia is very diverse. You cannot really say, okay, the model implemented in Hong Kong was similar to the model implemented in the Singapore. So, and then Asian countries were quite diverse in terms of the endowment and policies. And then some people look at the role of the political leadership. I know the political leaders play a very important role, but not very decisive. So some people look at especially the bad side of the politics in East Asian countries like crony capitalism. This is the basically bad governance and corruptions. So, well, politically, there are many political scientists, and so politics are important. But I'm trying to now emphasize more economic fundamental factors here. So basic policies of capitalism work, but it's not really just market driven, because if it is just market driven by the market, then every country could have done this economic success as much as East Asian countries. But it could not be done. So what are the common factors that the literature emphasized? And well, there are so many good factors, and these countries try to keep these factors. So one is the favorable demographic change. Labor force expanded during that period. They highly invested in human capital and a high saving rate. And then they try to make open the economy and export oriented. And the good macroeconomic management that's relative to the other emerging economies. And then income inequality. I'll get to this issue. It has been deteriorated, but during this industrialization period, Asian countries maintained quite equal income distribution that helped to promote human capital investment among the populations, and also help to avoid unproductive welfare policies in Asian countries. Institutions was relatively in the good quality, because if we look at the government structure and the quality of bureaucrats and the corruptions, Asian countries maintained good quality institutions. This is my claim, but okay, let's get to the couple of things. And I know I have a limited time, so this is demographic change. This is very much important, because people emphasize too much on what government did for Asia's industrialization. They ignored what the human factors contribute to the economic growth. Well, as you can see, the Asia's demographic dividend was huge, because the population, especially working age population, increased very significantly during this period. I mean, this is directly contributing to the economic growth. But nowadays, this is important. It has been declining. As you can see, the South Korea, Japan has already declining, and China. So this is a major challenge, whether these countries can still maintain strong growth. But this is during the highest growth period, this increase in the workforce played a very important role in Asia. Okay, so and not just the quantity of the labor, but quality of labor was very important. This is measuring the human capital quality is the complicated issue. You need to look at the education and skills and also health, so many things. But let's focus on the education here. And especially I want to focus on the South Korean case. Well, I'm from South Korea, so you know that. So, well, South Korea's case was amazing, because in 1960, on average, the average years of schooling for adult was 4 years. Means on average, they never finished primary school. It's just 4 years. But now, in 2010, was 12 years. So most of them graduated secondary school and went to the college and universities. So this happened to the success. Why? Well, there were some government policies, but the rate of return to education were very high in South Korea. So parents and society really want to increase investment in the human capital. compared to any other investment that works. Right? You don't need to buy stock. You just invest in your children. Okay? So, and then how this mobilize human resources, good quality human resources for economic growth requires a very delicate economic policies. So I don't have time to go through all of them, but let's say you need to link human capital policy to the national development policy because you need to utilize human resources for economic growth. So industrial demand is very important. For South Korea case, during the 70s, South Korea all of a sudden made junior middle school as a mandatory. Why? We need good quality secondary school graduate who will work at the labor-intensive industries. Nowadays, we are discussing a lot about tertiary education. Why? We are now getting into the more advanced economy, and we need more innovative workers. And we also mobilize the private sector investment. Okay, but there are challenges. Okay, so many challenges I have listed here. Usually when I teach the essential economics, and each topic will requires 3 hours to go through. So I'll just for this public talk, I'll just not go through the deeper analysis. But there are many things. Like why these countries cannot maintain the momentum of economic growth. There are some kind of natural law because the rate of return to the investment has been declining. This is called the convergence. And inequality issues. Now these countries also experience worsening income distribution because of some and population aging issues, technology issues, and very importantly, global protectionism and U.S. China conflict. It has huge implications to the region. So what do I mean by convergence? In this chart, you can see the growth pattern of China resembles the historical pattern of South Korea. What I mean, the horizontal axis is the per capita income, and the number is the actually per capita income in that year. And then the vertical axis is the 5-year average per capita GDP growth rate in the subsequent period. So it's the, for example, 2000 in South Korea means you can see the 2000, what was the level of the per capita GDP, and then what was the growth rate. So when I gave this kind of presentation about 7 years ago in China, saying that, okay, China's growth rate took increase significantly at the beginning because it implemented the reform, and then maintained the high growth rate, but eventually, how they maintain high growth? Continue to invest by mobilizing resources, but eventually it will decline because this convergence speed means this is from the economic growth model, because the rate of return to the investment eventually is declining, so your growth rate will decline. And then also your growth is coming from the imitating technology from advanced countries, but imitation is eventually will be very, very costly because it's hard to imitate frontier technology. So when I make this presentation in China, saying that your growth rate will decline from 8% eventually to the 4%, and then 3%, 2% may follow his historical experience. At the time, the graph didn't have the last point. Okay, it's just start to decline, but it will go down. Okay, so we'll see. We'll see what will happen. Okay, you will come. I may come back 10 years later here and then saying I will extend the line and then saying, okay, China is following the South Korea. It's completely different two countries, but there is a law, what the model implication. So I'm not saying that this is the only story, but there is one story. And then this population aging, everyone knows the speed of aging is very fast. In the line is very short. That means from the old age people's ratio in the total population has been significantly increasing more rapidly than any other countries. You can see some numbers. Right? But I want to just emphasize the one issue here. Even though data says these countries now is the aging society, what does it mean? The theory says aging population means the low economic growth. because decline in the workforce and the low saving because you need to support the old age people and the low productivity growth because people say older people tend to have a difficulty in adapting to new technologies and older people tend to less innovative than younger people. So now I become older, so I'm trying to write the paper saying that wait a minute, older workers can stay productive because the older people 20 years ago, 65, age 65 Korean, what was the education level? It's just a middle school graduate. Now, older people means the tertiary educated. And then the industry has changed. You can work in any other service sectors. So better educated and healthier and the longer work experience and better quality skill training. So some old guys here support my argument. Okay, we are older, but we can work hard. Huh? We can stay productive. Okay, so and then more interesting, there are empirical evidence nowadays. Actually, people look at the aging society. Aging induce investment, more investment in the capital because we want to substitute for this labor because labor becomes smaller and smaller in the quantity. So it's the more investment. And then people trying to develop labor-saving technological progress. Maybe growth rate will not decline significantly. So actually there is a very important paper by Asimov and others saying that it actually is happening in the United States because labor-saving technology has been increasing rapidly in the United States because people see this is the big opportunity to utilize the older workers. Okay, let's see. And then the technological innovation is the big challenge for Asian countries. I brought just two numbers. This is the big issues, but how rapidly China has increased its R&D spending. So R&D spending is the input. Output is hard to measure. So how much the China produced the good quality of the innovations. But the one measure is the international patent. But most of Chinese, now you can see the many countries, Asian countries increased international patent, but China's case mostly a domestic patent because they still see that it's very costly to get the international patent. So we'll see. But even this international patent, the number has been increasing by China. So, but still, I would say there are still gap in terms of the innovative ability as measured by the outcomes, but it has been reducing the gap quite significantly. If you visit China or if you visit Korea, you can see how much it has been changing. The speed has been changing very rapidly. They really emphasize the role of science and technology, especially in the advanced technologies. The government is really trying to support the boosting innovative power of the society. Okay. So income distribution, as I said, this is now we see the worsening income distributions, especially the 80s and the 90s and everywhere. So something similar things happen to Asian countries. Now you can see the top 10% income share. There is no difference between US and Asian countries. Asian countries used to be more equal, but not anymore. And also this measured by Gini index, it has been the worst performance in East Asian countries. Why? I mean, this is another issue. It's very important issues many people may be interested in. There are many papers. I mean, I'm emphasize this education inequality because still this, especially in China, there is significant gap in the educational attainment among the population, especially between the rural and urban area. And trade, South Korea case, trade played a very important role. Korea's 25% of trade is with China now. So we are exporting more skilled product, skilled intensive product and capital intensive product, and then we are importing more unskilled product over time. Not anymore, but it has giving a lot of downward pressure on the wage of unskilled workers. These kind of things. And it has also significant impact on the intergenerational mobility across generations. That's very bad. So how to improve income distribution without harming economic growth is a major challenge. from economist perspective, I mean, you can always say, okay, these countries spend more energy, more resources, more, and try to invent policies to reduce the income inequality. Yes, but some policies, you cannot shut down trade with China to reduce the wage inequality. I mean, that will have significant impact on the inflation and economic growth. So how to make everything work together to achieve the several objectives together as very important challenges for Asian countries as much as other countries. I'm going quickly, but now I'll move to the external challenges because this is the this global policy school, and there are many experts, I assume. So, but let's think about these issues. One issue is the nationalism and populism in many advanced countries. So, well, it has a rationale because the people, this democratic society, people fear this trade and globalization, some impact, significant impact on their jobs and their wages. That's also true. It's proved by some papers. So, very political leaders, okay, we need to pursue trade protection and anti-globalization measures that will help to increase their popularity. Yeah, that was happened in the starting from the many administrations in the U.S., even U.S., but it was very much highlighted by former U.S. President Trump, and then it has some significant impact to the world economy because we always thought the U.S. has been anyway. U.S. trying to keep the international market and international free trade and the liberal economic order in the world, but now moved significant to the protectionism and economic nationalism. And the U.S. China trade and technology tensions is part of that story, as we know. Okay, so and then also unfortunately, is due to coronavirus pandemic, some government use this as an opportunity to impose restrictions on the cross-border trade and the flows of the peoples. So now we see some anti-globalization or deglobalizations, and also some people see as another rise of the geo-economic fragmentation. What does it mean, geo-economic fragmentation? Geo-economics refers to the use of economic tools to advance geopolitical objectives. They used to use the military power or diplomacies, but now is where the countries are linked very deeply through trade and financial markets. Okay, now this geo-economic tools becomes very powerful. For instance, okay, you can give the sanctions in trade. You will not export some important raw materials to your partners. And then energy is a very important one. And then even you can use the currency. You cannot get access to this important currency such as US dollars. There will be a huge impact on the financial markets. Okay, this kind of geo-economic fragmentation has been intensified in recent years. This may have significant implications to the world over time, but it's also, in some sense, started from the China side because in one important initiative in 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping laid out his plans, said, okay, we'll establish 21st century Silk Road. So it's reviving the Silk Road, the overland and maritime route is this is from the newspapers, but you can, okay, so now China is linking East Asia and with Europe. And then this is the kind of the economic the alliance, say, through the infrastructure. Okay, so, well, but this is giving some reactions from the US side because the US has now started a re-engagement with Asia in this case. So it's build many initiatives, and then Quad was one, and then recently Biden administration started this IPEF, this Indo-Pacific economic framework for prosperity. So there is no, China is not part of that. Was surprising. I'm going to India early March to participate in one big conference organized by the Indian think tank. So they said we'll discuss the role of Asia, and I was surprised there is no China representative except China. So even U.S. scholars are there. Interesting movement, but okay, this kind of things is happening. So what's the implications? This is very unfortunate from my perspective. Why? Well, there might be not a war when people if you go to South Korea, for example, every week you'll see some discussions about something will happen in Taiwan, and then did you give some implication to the North Korea, what South Korea should do, I mean. And then also people saying, oh, U.S. government is imposing, keeping a lot of pressure on South Korea by passing the law such as this Inflation Reduction Act, and then also CHIP. They are trying to set up the pro-CHIP alliance. I mean, I'm not sure I'll get to that, but so this is the. I don't think these countries will get into the war. They know the big stakes are there, but the global value chains is now changing because the U.S. started to realign the global supply chains, and also the countries trying to bring their supply chains near to their own countries. So this will have some significant impact. Why? Because we understand that there are 3 poles, as you can see that this global, the size is you can say what are the major poles. I mean, this is the Europe and the US and Asia are centered on the United States and Germany and China. And then other countries are linked to this global value chains, where US can cut these chains to the China and then build own global value chains. What happened to South Korea? South Korea rely on the 2 big center. So South Korea export 25% of total export to to China, and then 14% to United States, and then the 16% to ASEAN countries. Okay, we rely on the 2 or 3 poles in the Europe, and it's very important markets, and then they are just fragmented. Okay, this will be the big challenge to the many Asian countries, and then also to China. So we'll see. I mean, what will happen? It's a huge negative impact on China. We understand that, but this is the mainly. In some sense, I should not exaggerate too much. I mean, this kind of realigning global supply chains. This has been some momentum because of some geopolitical reasons, and then maybe there will be changed. I mean, because the cost is still high, and then some strategic products such as the microchips maybe completely realigned, but the other product will still rely on the big markets, and then so there might be some change in terms of the conflict. Okay, so what will be the future of Asia? So we know that there were significant challenges to Asian countries, as I said, but yeah, they will continue to achieve strong economic growth. Growth rate will be higher than U.S. or Western countries, and then so they will reduce the gap in the per capita GDP with the level of the Western countries. And then yes, already the engine of global production, consumption, and innovation cannot destroy that. And its influence in the global governance system will increase. It has been changing. The world has been changing. The IMF and World Bank and UN system has been changing. It will continue. I mean, it will be fluctuating, but eventually we'll get there. But that does not mean these countries will not suffer from any crisis. It may get into some crisis, significant growth slow down in the coming decades. And one point I want to make is that Asia is very hard to be united as one Asia. So maybe people know that if you are from Asia. So, well, forecasting is always a dangerous job. But as I said, I'll go to India. So I try to actually project what will happen between China and India in terms of the per capita GDP in 2060. Why 2060? In 2060, I'll be very safe because someone asked, oh, I made the correct forecasting or not. I'll not be there. So I want to just make a projection over the 40 years, very safe. Okay, so you can see the gap will decline significantly. So China's per capita GDP will be very close to the United States. You know the size of the population. So China will be dominating power in the world, even though they can maintain only average 3% growth over time, or eventually decline to 2%, but still higher. Okay, we can reduce the gap, and you cannot deny that. But it's still, US is the dominant power. Their per capita GDP is the highest compared to this group. So among this group. So we cannot really say Asia's power will supplant the power of the United States, unless US make significant mistakes and then destroy itself by some measures. Okay, so this is number, and yeah, Asian century. Sometimes people say, okay, yeah, then we'll start the Asian century. Then question is the Asia can be integrated and then they cooperate themselves. Well, it's the question, because the share of intra-regional trade is one measure. It's increased significantly, and they rely on their own neighbors more and more. This will happen, and then because of the U.S. policy, this will increase and more. Because the people in U.S. only read the newspapers, or some Asian countries will invest more in U.S. But many Asian countries, for example, South Korean companies now invest more in the Southeast Asian countries, because it's the cost is much cheaper. Think about the labor cost. Even though U.S. government can provide a lot of subsidy, the labor cost in Vietnam and Indonesia is quite cheap in India. So U.S. cannot compete. It can compete in the high-tech product, but but otherwise, it's still Asian markets for Asian countries would remain as very important. And then, but then say, oh, Asia can cooperate and become the one Asia or one integrated Asia, very difficult, because the economic and politically they are very diverse. This is not one Asia, and there are territorial and historical dispute. That's very between India and China, between Japan and Korea, and between China and Korea. So it's so many complicated issues, and nationalism always the important issue in Asian countries. And then there are no political leadership, such as in the Europe during the post-war period. So, okay, let me conclude my presentation saying that okay, the world economy has been changing very quickly, but we'll see the increasing power of the Asia. But does it imply that the 21st century will become the Asian century? Well, no. It's at least I could say it cannot be dominated by only one hegemonic power, such as the United States, because as we can see, the Asian powers has been rising. So this should be the kind of the 1 century. Perhaps we could call everyone's century. It's a more balanced and multipolar world. So this is implies that this is the time of the great interdependence. So global community should be benefited from the more close cooperations. I think that's at the global level, that's very important. I know that this is the challenging issue at nowadays, especially. But otherwise, it could be nobody's century, and there will be global instability can continue over the coming decades. So sometimes have people too much afraid of the rise of the Asia. Sometimes too much just exaggerate the rise of the Asia's power. So we should avoid too much Asiaphoria or Asiaphobia. And as said, maybe for Asia, one big challenge is the regional cooperation. This will strengthen among the especially big powers like Japan and South Korea and also India and China. So that will be important. But it's the we hope at the global level there will be more cooperations. And I think it's the important thing, as I mentioned here, is it's not people look at the geopolitical issues, but eventually this is stable and sustained growth matters a lot, because the rise of the power of the Asian countries came from the rising economic power rather than any other diplomatic power. So this would be important. Okay, so let me stop here. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, thank you so much for doing this extremely hard job of summarizing more than 30 years of your research and policy work on Asian economy within just 30 minutes. All right, so now we will open up the Q&A discussion. So let me select the two questions, and then you answer, and then we can do so from the floor. Yeah, first and second. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not an economist, so you'll have to excuse the naivety of my questions. Let's assume that this tension between this cold technological war between China and the US develops and aggravates. What would be the countries in Asia that would be best placed to become the new China?
Become the new China. Where is the?
So let us get the second
okay,
question, and then
Oh, thank you. I mean, this is very informative session. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just have one comment and question, actually. The comment is, so when you said title of this presentation is Asian-centric, I was kind of wondering, what really do we have in common with Asia? So when you talk about Asia, it really includes half the world population, starting from Japan all the way to Israel. So when you're talking about Asia, I mean, India has very little to do with China these days, and this country is actually have political disputes. And so that's the term that's been used, but I'm not sure whether it's really means something in terms of the huge diversity in that. So if you're asking me if 23rd century is Asian century, I would say yes, because it's half the population. You always have something significant going in that huge region. So, I feel out about that. The question I have is this. So, you talked about the rise of China, and given the size of the country, it's obviously significant. But if you recall what happened in the Japanese economy back in the 80s and 90s, we all thought that Japan would overtake the United States. And if you remember, per capita income measure used, the Japanese economy, per capita income was $42,000, and US was about 32. But then again, it had 4 decades of stagnation, as we all know. So now China, the population started to decline. And then their governance has started to affect private enterprises the way that's quite alarming. If you see what's happening with the Chinese economy and private corporations, they're under huge pressure. And then we have huge doubts about economic indicators that are coming from China. So 3%, growth rate maintenance seems quite astonishing if you actually see that for the decades. So do you still think it's likely that China will maintain its trajectory and then surpass the United States in the end? So that's my question.
Okay, so first question was about who will be the country in Asia could be play the role of the China. China's role cannot be replaced by other countries, but in terms of this technology war between the U.S. and China gives some momentum to other countries. Right now, Taiwan is a major producer of the microchip. And then Japan is now investing in the semiconductor industries. It used to, now is investing more. And then Korea also got a lot of attention because we are the major product of the microchip. By the way, Korea's microchip is 48% is exporting to China. So this is the how to reallocate these things are huge company. But I'm looking at the more like the role of the India and ASEAN countries, because the many foreign direct investment firms will move to the Southeast Asian countries. They have similar endowment as China, so labor cost is cheaper, and some countries like Vietnam is the centrally controlled, and then it has governance system is maybe better than other countries. So that's why the people go to Vietnam, and then the government policy is more favorable to the foreign investment. India is depending on how you look at it. It has young, talented people, but government policy is bureaucratic. The controls are not very favorable to the foreign investment compared to the China. So other countries will emerge eventually, but China's the high-tech industries will get hit by these initiatives by the United States, and then but eventually they will become the innovative countries. We'll see. I mean, what will happen to the it's related to the question raised by the second person. Compared to China to Japan, it has some common factors, and also it's quite different environment. As Japan, of course, per capita income increased significantly, and then that's mostly measured by market exchange rate. So exchange rate was highly over-evaluated at the time. So after Plaza Accord, it has went back to the level, very low level, and then the U.S. the export industry of the Japanese economy was hit very negatively, and then it cannot really get back to the original position. And then also, as I showed the share, actually Japan's GDP share in the world was much smaller than the current level of the China, so it's hard to compare to China. Maybe the one big question is China will suffer from the Japanese style crisis that will have a huge impact on the financial crisis, and China may not get out of the long-term stagnation over time. If you go to China, even say when I was at the ADB 2010, even 2000, they were studying about the experience of the Japan, how we could avoid Japan's experience. China has a huge population. You can allocate the 1,000 people. Okay, you study this one, you study this one. Yeah, it's very easy to do that. Actually, you have a big think tank they are studying. They try to avoid this. So they always be very careful to avoid big financial crisis, and they try to keep the resources to avoid this economy-wide scale. And then they try to avoid the overvaluation of the currency. So I'm on the side of that China has the ability to avoid the major crisis of time, and government can avoid that. But we understand that this governance system of China, especially from I should say the Western perspective, has been deteriorating. I agree that, but this will have what kind of implications that will give to the economic side is more complicated. I think it's unfortunate that China is very authoritarian. It become more authoritarian, and then it's undemocratic. But the economic policies are still kept well. So we'll see. Of course, I should not support this blocking all cities due to COVID-19. That's mainly due to political reasons.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so let us collect more questions. Caroline, and then the second. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the Beijing consensus, but you didn't talk much about the Washington consensus. Yet many of the reasons for success in Asia are quite aligned with the Washington consensus. So I was curious about your view towards that, and whether there are also lessons from Asia for other regions and countries. So one thing I used to always hear in Latin America or Africa is, how can we imitate the Asian growth, China growth, etc. but there's so many things that came together, whether it's education, stability, trade, institutions, et cetera, that you pointed out. What would you recommend to countries that want to have their own miracle?
My question is, you say the economy's growth is related to the human capital growth. So I heard in the news that many students in Korea withdraw their admission of the top universities. And will this be related to the decrease in the economy? And I think this is correlated to the decrease of the birth rate in Korea, and it has a negative growth on the birth rate. And following to all the OECD members of the countries, they are currently having like right above the 1%. And will the other countries, if their birth rate decreases like this, will the other countries' students will withdraw their college admission from the top universities? And it'll lead to the decrease of the economic growth.
Okay, so first question is how to assess the Washington consensus versus Beijing consensus. That's a huge topic, but I want to just quote the one important paper by the current dean of the one school in the Beijing University. It's a very famous paper. He's actually saying that the reason why China was so successful was actually China was following the Washington consensus. So it's an interesting and important observation. So it's China started to liberalize this economy and did the right things to encourage export industries and also maintain the macroeconomic stability. So in that sense, it's correct. The one controversial thing was the full-leg capital market opening. So that was Washington consensus. The term itself is ambiguous, but they usually include the financial market liberalization, especially the opening the markets to the foreigners too quickly. That's because these countries do not have international currency. So international liquidity is always the big important issue, such as in the Latin American countries too. So that's why you need to be very careful in the opening the capital markets, bringing short-term capitals, and then trying to maintain the stability in the foreign exchange market. So I think in terms of Washington consensus, many of them might be correct, but some factors may not be really good for emerging economies at a certain development stage. But one controversial issue is still the role of the industrial policy. So this targeting in the certain strategic industries has always the important issue. If you implement their policies in the right way, it's actually better than just leaving to the market. Everyone knows, but whether bureaucrat really can do it. So some countries, government can do it. Some other countries could be cut because the government is trying to promote certain industries, and it's actually this is a declining industry. It's giving a lot of subsidies and then very good product. But unfortunately, Korea case and China case, most of industry policies were successful. So that's my assessment. But some policies were also failure. But let's say that whether these Asia's policies could be replicated in the other countries, what would be the major lessons? I mean, I think this is the actually very complicated issues. But one thing I want to just focus on the one thing. Human capital is of course important. Many even nowadays, latecomers in Asia lack the human resources. So that's important everywhere. But one issue is this trade openness. The world has changed. In the 1970s and 80s, and Korea or emerging Asian economies, including China, was very fortunate because it could use the global markets. And the U.S. gave a lot of preferential access to those emerging economies. Now it has changed. And then also, China itself is now a big player in the global markets. It gives us some opportunities, but also a lot of competitions with the Chinese exporters in the global markets. And many, for example, South Korea cases, now many Chinese companies are catching up with South Korean companies. So if we say with the African countries, well, you need promote certain industries, but situation can change a lot. So it's more complicated.
Yeah, so we may have, say, 30 seconds to answer to one remaining question.
What was the question? So it's Korea's. I will just focus on the fertility issues, university issues, so we can discuss it. This is big challenge, low fertility. But I'm not saying that this problem can be solved by just giving subsidy to the family. Okay, if you have a child, we'll give subsidy. Because the culture and society has a lot of difficulty for women to have children. That's in South Korea. How to change? And then as the people know the family care is very expensive, and then sending the children to the good schools in the very competitive situation is very difficult. But another issue is that we don't have an immigrant, and then this is a very traditional society. You cannot have a baby without formal marriage. If you go to European countries, many European countries, actually the fertility rate is high because some portion of the childbirth is by immigrant. They have a high number of children, and then also many of them are out of marriage children. So Korea and China is very particular. It's less than actually. This Korea's number is 0.2%. It's out of marriage childbirth. If we go to France, everyone knows the number, more than half without marriage. So because you need to first marry, otherwise we cannot have children. So Korea's fertility rate will decline significantly. But this is big issue. Korea's fertility rate will increase. There is some economic rationale. Nowadays, many females went to the universities and getting jobs, but also later they will just delay the childbirth. So that happened in Japan. So if the history returns in Korea, they may have more children. So 0.8 currently is too low. It's extremely low. Maybe it will go back to the 1.1. If you look at the UN projections, they actually say Korea's fertility rate will increase to the 1.2 in 10 years. So you'll see.
Yeah, I hope so too. We will see. All right, so
Yes.
Okay, so it's the time to wrap up. So I hate this job, stopping the very interesting discussion. But fortunately, we will have a short reception after this. So please stay here and then bring around. So again, so please join me in thanking the PLF Lee providing the